Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Farwa Amir, the Director of South Asia Initiatives at the Asia Society Policy Institute here in New York. And on behalf of ASPI, we're delighted to be hosting this event on the geopolitical shifts in Asia. What do they mean for Pakistan and regional stability in partnership with the Express Tribune? There has been a lot unfolding recently, from economic disruptions to rapidly changing security dynamics, creating a palpable sense of global uncertainty. Within Asia, there have been significant shifts in power and strategic alliances owing to the great power competition, transformation technology, extreme weather events, and a host of other factors. Of course, South Asia, geostrategically located within Asia and the rest of the globe, is at the epicenter of these regional and global transformations. Against this backdrop of change, it is very important for us to understand what are some of the key geopolitical trends that are reshaping or shaping Asia currently, and what are the implications on pivotal regional players like Pakistan, and what does it mean for overall regional stability? To unpack all of this and more, I'm delighted to be in conversation today with Rory Daniels, Managing Director of the Asia Society Policy Institute, here with me in New York, and Senator Mushaid Hussain, former Federal Minister for Information and Media Development, Pakistan, along with Kamran Yusuf, journalist and host of the review on Express News. Thank you all for joining me today. Before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping notes for everyone who's attending the webinar. We will start with some questions on my end for the panelists, but we will take audience Q&A at the end of our segment today. So please make use of the Q&A function on your Zoom screens to send your questions, and we'll try and respond to some of those later. Well, so without further ado, if I could just come to you, Rory, first. You have years of experience sort of studying, researching, analyzing, and commenting on Asian policy affairs with a particular focus on US-China relations. If you can help set the stage for us today in terms of identifying what are some of the key geopolitical trends within Asia that should be on every Asia policy watcher's radar, and particularly in terms of this intensifying US-China competition that we are seeing, how do you see some of the broader regional implications on Asia? And of course, if you can comment on South Asia as well.
Thank you so much, Farwa, and thanks to Express Tribune for co-hosting this panel with us. I'm delighted to be here to discuss this set of topics, which are some of my favorite issues to unpack. So, I mean, what I see is a set of pressures on the region driven by global trends. The two most salient trends from my perspective are, first, the return of geopolitical competition to the forefront of international relations. This is really driven, I think, in large part by strategic mistrust between the United States and China. Particularly as the US and China emerged in the post-Cold War era as winners of the globalization process, they began to see each other more and more as constraints on the exercise of their own power. And this, I think, is a really important and somewhat understudied trend. It's not that the process of globalization did kind of lift all economies up the value chain, or many economies up the value chain. But for the US and China, the effects of the process of globalization created many more benefits. So the US and China economies are up here. Everybody else's economies rose, but they're still down here. The US and China are so head and shoulders above other potential economic powers. And, you know, the mistrust is really reflected in how the US and China conduct their affairs in the rest of Asia and the world. So for the US, I think that the fundamental interests that the US is trying to pursue in Asia are manyfold. Of course, there's a set of interests that have to do with regional peace and stability, with understanding that the 21st century is the Asian century, and that Asia's economic dynamism is really driving some of the growth in the global economy. But also the US has kind of long-standing ideological interests that are prevalent in its foreign policy in the world, including an attention to human rights, sticking up for underdogs, a need and a desire to reflect a fair playing field for citizens inside countries and also for countries in the world. China, on the other hand, is, I think, a rising power that is still maturing. It's interested in transactional relationships that help it with its core national interests, whether those include maritime territorial security, economic interests of the Chinese people, making sure that the Chinese Communist Party, the system itself is seen as a positive force on global affairs. And so all of this is happening at a time when the Chinese economy is slowing, and the US and China are really seeing the other's power as a threat to exercising their own power to shape a world that's complementary to all of those interests. At the same time, the region, I think maybe particularly in South Asia and Southeast Asia, still maintains a need and a desire for greater globalization, while the drivers of those economic growth are slowing and changing. And this is both a natural economic process that happens after countries kind of start moving up the value chain, but it's also exacerbated by the pressures of the pandemic, the need to create more resilient supply chains, mistrust in technology, the future of technology and warfare, and what that means for US-China strategic mistrust. Now, all of that is happening, and it could be negative for the region, but at the same time, I see in US-China relations, particularly over the past 2 years, a real drive for stabilization. And a lot of pragmatic coordination continues. So I think the implication for the region is how that balance between pragmatism and mistrust plays out over time. That will certainly be affected by the US election results in November, as the two campaigns seem to be taking a vastly different approach towards how they want to manage the balance between mistrust and pragmatism with China. I think maybe the last thing I'll say in the context of today's news, that China at least convened, if not brokered, a consolidation between two Palestinian rivals, Fatah and Hamas, that China is taking a much bigger role in the global diplomatic stage. And the US has a choice now of how it reacts to that. China has a deep interest, I think, not only in proving to the countries of the global South that it can stand up for their interests, not only in making sure that their relations with Muslim majority countries on and around their borders, including Pakistan, remain strong, but also really in stabilizing the Israel-Hamas or Israel-Palestinian conflict. China has enormous economic interest in Israel, particularly on the technology side. It has enormous economic interest just in the Middle East in general as a transit zone for selling its products to the economies of Europe, as emerging economies in their own right, with which China could deal in terms of energy security, in terms of food security, and again, in terms of global reputation. So the US has to ask itself, is China's role in this process pragmatic, or is it a sign of an intensifying geopolitical bloc rivalry? I think the answer is obviously still to be determined, but based on the US response to China's other moves in the Middle East, including the deal that was brokered between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I think there is a chance, at least in this outgoing Biden administration, that the US does see China's role, if not as productive, at least as net neutral for US interests. That's a lot, so I'll stop there. Thank you, Farwa.
Thank you so much, Rory. And I guess what you left us with the balance between pragmatism and mistrust is what is going to be key for the US-China dynamic, and something for all Asian powers or Asian players working with both have to look out for. And you mentioned the idea of economically driven sort of initiatives that both countries are working on, and then Global South, that's a whole different conversation. We can embark on that. But speaking of which, if I could come to you, Senator Hussain, and we just talked about US China with Rory here, and both important global players in South Asia, and of course for Pakistan for multiple different reasons, political, security, economics, certainly. How do you see the impacts of some of these key geopolitical trends that Rory mentioned, this whole balance of US trying to figure out whether China's moves are pragmatic or some assertion from their end as a power leading Asia and the global South? And not only just that, but also keeping in mind some of the major political transitions that Asia has seen, particularly South Asia has seen this year, whether it's key elections in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, but not to mention also these elections in Iran and Southeast Asia. How do you see all of these kind of impacting a region's internal dynamics? I do want to add that you also have had recent engagements at key regional forums, including the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's meeting. So it would be great if we could get a sense from you on how the countries are responding. Are you seeing a shift in the regional order? Over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be here at this very important webinar between the Asian Society Policy Institute in New York and the Express Tribune, Pakistan's preeminent daily newspaper, both in English and Urdu, as well as television. So I think that the topic is very relevant because of late I've been traveling in the region. I was in Iran, I was in China, I was in Russia, and just came from Bahrain for a dialogue which was there on South Asian security hosted by the British think tank IISS, International Institute of Strategic Studies. So I can feel the winds of change sweeping across much of Asia when we see this world of turbulence and transformation. And let me just focus on this transformation, which is very key. I'm reminded of what two leaders, one from Asia, one from the West, said about this current age and current epoch. President Xi Jinping of China says that we are witnessing once in a century changes, huge change. And I remember seeing an article of the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, in Foreign Affairs, I think last year, when he talked of epochal tectonic change. So what is this tectonic change that we are referring to? Let me sum it up. Maybe as a journalist, I'm used to, shorthand, and I will sum it up in 3 R's. We see the retrenchment of American influence, American power, American clout, and a slow motion unraveling of the American century, and what Ms. Daniels rightly said, the dawn of the Asian century. That is, I think, the first big reality. The second big reality, if you see the big picture, is the rise of China. And I think it was documented last month. I think The Economist carried a cover story, I think mid-June it was, China, the scientific superpower. And I was also reading the study done by Harvard University, edited by Graham Allison, the great tech rivalry, China versus the United States. And it's a 52-page document available through Google, internet. And it says that China is overtaking the United States in high-tech manufacturing. So that is another big reality which is there. And the third big reality that we see in our region is what I see, the resurgence of 5 Muslim middle powers, who I think in the next 10 years would be playing a very key role in their respective regions. Pakistan, Indonesia, Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. So in this regard, we can see different conflicts. For example, we talked of retrenchment of Western influence or US influence. For the first time in 30 years, we see Pakistan, India, and China, for example, taking a similar position on a global issue, the Ukraine war. All 3 abstained. Pakistan, India, and China, for example. And there is this. And Ms. Daniels just mentioned about China hosting the Palestinian factions. It's a very interesting contrast. The United States is hosting Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington, D.C., and he is supposed to address the American Congress on Wednesday. China is hosting 14 Palestinian factions who have come together for the first time ever, and they have agreed on a unity document, a unity government, and also to have joint control of the occupied territories in Palestine. So I think this is a historic development following up on last year's Iran-Saudi rapprochement brokered by China. So you can see the Chinese footprint is not just in Asia itself, it's spreading, and it has an outreach even in the Middle East. And of course, a major vehicle of that influence is the Belt and Road Initiative of Xi Jinping, which is probably the most important diplomatic and developmental initiative of the 21st century. And recently, they also had a very important meeting in Beijing, what they call the third plenum of the Communist Party, where they have given a blueprint for reform under Xi Jinping. And they say that he's the successor to Deng Xiaoping, the famous Chinese reformer. So this change is very evident, but we see Chinese policies driven by the economy, trade, and investment. US policies mostly still mired in a Cold War mindset, security-centric and military-dominated, because we're talking of expansion of NATO, Asian NATO. NATO is opening an office in Jordan also now. And we also see Quad. They're going to be the first exercises of Quad in the Bay of Bengal in October. We see AUKUS. So we see this contrasting narratives, contrasting perspectives, and these are going to dominate the debate and the direction of policy and events in Asia in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hussain. Very interesting insight, especially when you talk about winds of change. It's also been an important political week here in the United States, with a lot of changes that have taken place over the weekend, and likely we're going to see some interesting developments in the foreseeable future as well. But the sense that I'm getting from your remarks is that, of course, China and US have divergent views. There is still, in areas such as tech, as you highlighted, but also in certain areas where Muslim powers are concerned, China is playing a dominant role, and it's being received well from its counterparts. With that, you talked about Pakistan, and we're going to talk about Pakistan a little bit more later in our conversation as well today. But we discussed political transitions with you, but I just want to highlight and come to Kamran here to discuss Pakistan's own political transition. Pakistan had elections in February earlier this year. The government has now completed over 100 days in the office, and the elections happened, of course, amid a lot of political uncertainty, instability, economic instability, and some of these challenges stick and continue. How do you see some of the larger developments that we've just discussed between both Rory and Senator Hussain on what's taking place in Asia and what's happening within the US-China dynamic impacting Pakistan's internal or external policies anyway? And also, do you see Pakistan being in a position to sort of navigate these challenges and issue sets, but also making sure that it's balancing its Eastern and Western interests while keeping its own national interests in check? So over to you, Kamran, for your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Farva. I think at the moment, as you talked about, the transition in Pakistan, of course, that we have seen a lot of uncertainty in the run-up to the February 8 elections, and there were a lot of hopes that after the February 8 elections, some semblance of political stability would come to Pakistan. But apparently, Pakistan is facing, at the moment, I think, the triple challenge. There is an element of political instability, then you have, economic challenges ahead, and then, of course, you cannot forget the security challenge. And given this, as we talked about how the region is evolving with, great power rivalry, the rise of China. Of course, that we often talked about the geostrategic location of Pakistan, how Pakistan, can take full advantage of that. But the problem is that given the kind of problems that currently Pakistan is facing, for example, I would refer to, a couple of interesting reports that would, give us good insight. Recently, the Pakistani government officially released the results of the latest census. And the Pakistani population, as we know that now, has about 241 million. That is not the headline. The real number is that 80%, 79% of that population, staggering 190 million, is below the age of 40. So that is the number, of course, when you take into account the one that needs job, a better life. And then I would refer to another report recently released by Fitch, one of the three leading international credit rating agencies. And they not present a very rosy picture about the prospects of Pakistan's economy. They say that for the next decade, Pakistan's economy would grow around 3.5% an average, and that is far less than peers like Bangladesh and India. And for Pakistan to take full advantage of what opportunities ahead because of the changing, geostrategic environment, Pakistan's economy needs to grow around 6-7%. So if we take into account these two numbers, and given that the latest census also indicate that Pakistan literacy rate is still hovering around between 60 and 65%. So I can assume that most of the young people are still not skilled, uneducated. So that takes me to the third major challenge, because that provides a fertile ground for extremist forces to exploit, the young population. And we already know that there is a lot of political polarization in Pakistan. So against this backdrop, I think it is a huge challenge for Pakistan to navigate its interest. Though historically, I say that Pakistan has shown that even during difficult times, Pakistan did protect its core interests. For example, I give you one example. After 9/11 attacks, Pakistan became the frontline state in the US war on terror, while Pakistan became US ally. But despite being close to the US and received security and economic assistance, Pakistan did not compromise on its one core area. For example, it never took action against the Afghan Taliban and the Haqqani network, because at that time, Pakistan felt that it was in Pakistan's interest, though it requires a separate session that whether that policy was correct, because now we are facing, the blowback of that policy. But Pakistan, even during that period, resisted the pressure and, stuck to its core interests. And previously also, when the US imposed sanctions, Pakistan did not compromise on its, nuclear program. Having said that, whether Pakistan can navigate these challenges in the future as well, I think a lot will depend how Pakistan, tackles with its economy. If Pakistan continues to face these economic challenges, and the forecast, of course, does not look very good. So that's where Pakistan's vulnerabilities lie. Because if Pakistan does not put its house in order, if does not bring, restore political stability and, bring necessary fundamental changes that, lessen the dependence on the outside world when it comes to its economy, then I think we will be facing a serious challenge in the future. And I believe that this is a serious question that Pakistan needs to ponder. And I think in the current situation, the way things are evolving, Pakistan can only protect its core interests if it addresses the core economic challenge and addresses some of the political problems that Pakistan is facing at the moment. And of course, that is linked with the country's security situation as well.
Thank you, Kamran. Appreciate your candor here. It's like you said, Pakistan's going through very turbulent time when it comes to the economy, and a difficult and a controversial IMF bailout package, another one to be negotiated. It is all going to surround how Pakistan is able to save space economically to be able to build down external policies. I do want to go back to sort of like that zoomed out view and talk about broader Asia once again and come to you, Rory. Russia is another important player in the region, and increasingly so, with the US-Russia dynamic getting stronger, there's a bit of a cushiony relationship between the two of them. But if you look at South Asia also, between Pakistan and India, and Senator Hussain just alluded to that Pakistan, India, and China are on the same footing when it comes to Ukraine. You've seen Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif meet with President Putin on the sidelines of the SCO. Of course, Prime Minister Modi had a much talked about bilateral visit to Moscow, which sort of reaffirmed that strategic partnership between India and Russia. How do you see these evolving engagements, interaction between major Asian countries and Russia, especially in the middle of this US-Russia sort of tensions that we're seeing since the Ukraine conflict?
Yeah, this is an incredibly important question to unpack. I think I'd like to go back to a comment made by Senator Hussain about the need for the US to pursue alliance relationships in Asia and around the world, including strengthening and expanding those alliances in many significant ways, whether it's AUKUS, whether it's more informal groupings like the Quad, whether it's NATO. From my perspective, and I think from an American perspective, a lot of this is focused on ensuring that the geopolitical competition that we're seeing, where the process of globalization has created power among many different countries with different interests and different systems, is balanced, and that particularly China, but I think also Russia, cannot nakedly use its power to run roughshod over the interests of smaller countries on its periphery. In an atmosphere of strategic mistrust, this is a somewhat delicate strategy to pursue. If you run too hard on security-focused alliances, you risk inviting the backlash that you're trying to prevent. If you are kind of too lackadaisical about the way that China and Russia really do want to use their power in order to compromise the interests of their smaller neighbors, then you give them running space to do that. For me, I think it's significant that when Russia was gearing up to prosecute this war in Ukraine, to invade Ukraine, it went to China first and secured what it called a no-limits partnership. We can argue about whether that partnership has remained no limits. I think there are some limits that are beginning to appear, particularly in terms of how China wants to protect its ability to do economic transactions in the international system while Russia is under severe sanctions. But I think that Russia thought that it was very important to secure that relationship first because China could give it cover for doing things in the international system that all countries have agreed are wrong. And, invading another country is wrong under our UN charter, a charter of which all of these countries are a member. So this is a really big strategic challenge for the US in a world where it cannot exercise the same type of power that it could perhaps in the Cold War, the end of the Cold War era. How do you prevent countries from using their power in ways that are contrary to the values of the international system? Russia's relationships with Asia, again, like the US has to sit and think about this. It needs to make a choice. The US can isolate Russia. It can pour all of its power into isolating Russia. That perhaps does not get the US closer to the goal of managing a Russia that is aggressive to its neighbors and in its historical empire. So I think the countries of South Asia can have a role to play here in communicating US concerns directly to Russia and helping the US kind of manage its information flow about what's happening inside Russia decision-making. And that can all be to the benefit of global peace and stability. But I would say that China is relatively uncomfortable with some of these relationships. I mean, I think that many times Chinese officials say that they don't support a bloc mentality, but they seek it. They seek it themselves because they understand that the US and its alliance system is likely the biggest constraint on a naked exercise of power. So Russia's ability to circumvent some Chinese interest in pursuing these relationships with countries of South Asia, maybe particularly India, but also countries of Northeast Asia like North Korea, I think that these relationships, the depth by which Russia has reached out, the receptivity to that outreach, the material gains that countries on China's periphery are also deriving from Russia's international isolation. I think those are all things that make China slightly uncomfortable. And it will be interesting from my perspective to see how China tries to balance the interest between pragmatism and absolutism as it looks at how Russia is going east into China's neighborhood, when historically Russia's domain was mostly focused on Europe and perhaps the Middle East. So this is an evolving set of dynamics that we'll continue to watch. But I think that for South Asia, it's a strategic opportunity and a huge strategic challenge. Again, a delicate balance is probably needed to make the most of it.
Well, thank you, Rory. Completely agree that delicate balance makes sense for South Asia. India has held, since you mentioned it, has a prominent role to play, being especially close to Russia for many years now. And in terms of the Ukraine conflict, they've held that dialogue and diplomacy is the way, and a lot of countries have approached India, especially after the bilateral summit, to convey that messaging and play that role of information flow, like you correctly pointed out. But for Pakistan itself, this case is sort of an interesting one. Russia itself for the subcontinent is quite interesting, where you have India with good relations with Russia, as we talked about, but strained relationships with China, and perhaps the most strained it has been in recent times. For Pakistan, Russia, of course, has emerged as an important potential partner. A lot of discussions around energy cooperation, and we can go into the depths of it. But with the relationship with China, it has been, these two countries are all-weather allies, and at least rhetorically speaking, the relationships are great and are likely going to be on the strong footing, as most leaders imply. But Kamran, if I could come to you very quickly to just get a sense of how do you see this dynamic between Russia and China and Pakistan's relationship with both working out for Pakistan in any way? Do you think Pakistan is in a position to leverage this equation for its own benefit? Since you talked about economy very much, could it help Pakistan's economic ambitions? Over to you, Kamran.
Well, there has been a lot of debate in Pakistan and even beyond that, of course, as even Mushahid Saab mentioned, that US apparently is a receding power, and now we have more than one power, like China also. So there has been a lot of debate in Pakistan that what Pakistan should do. Should Pakistan, join hands with countries like China, Russia, and other regional players? There has been a lot of, temptation given that we have so much mistrust with the US. But of course, that when it comes to Pakistani decision makers, they always believe that Pakistan should avoid, getting entangled as far as the rivalry between US and China is concerned. But at the same time, I think Pakistan believes that good relations with countries like Russia and China can certainly diversify Pakistan's foreign policy options. And this transformation actually has been taking place for some time. We do know that both Pakistan and Russia were Cold War rivals, but then, of course, in international relations, as often it is said, that there are no permanent enemies and no permanent friends. And that shift actually came, I think, more than a decade ago, precisely in 2011, when Pakistan had a tumultuous relationship with the US. We had Raymond Davis incident, we had Osama bin Laden event, and then shooting of Pakistani soldiers in a friendly fire by the US forces stationed in the neighboring Afghanistan. That was the time when Pakistan felt that we need to diversify our policy options. And I understand, and I knew that there was a long debate behind closed doors in the parliament, and the parliament then recommended certain sets of proposals. And the one proposal was that in order to protect countries' interests, it is important that Pakistan should reset its relationship with countries like Russia. And that's when, the back channel and the quiet diplomacy started, and both countries covered a lot of ground. And then the way China, rose to the occasion, emerging as a second largest economy, relationship between China and Russia. So Pakistan, and we also need to understand that both Russia and China are the permanent members of the UN Security Council. So there are so many issues where Pakistan feels that both countries, can protect Pakistan's interest, and they have actually also protected Pakistan's interest, even when Pakistan, during the peak of war on terror, facing a lot of criticism from the US and the West that Pakistan was playing a double game. It often Russia and the China coming to Pakistan's rescue, that Pakistan, was giving so much sacrifices. So in Pakistan's foreign policy priorities, Pakistan feels that certainly, even if we do not formally join the China-Russia camp, but improved relationship with both these countries and can play a huge role. And also, I think that you mentioned the way China-Russia relationship are growing. So that is also one factor, that Russia-Pakistan relationship are also growing. And only recently, Pakistan for the first time imported crude oil from Russia on an experiment basis. Whether, in the long run, as far as that deal is feasible, that remains to be seen. There are certain other energy projects where Russia is quite keen. So certainly Pakistan at the moment wants to have good relations with, of course, China, Russia. But I believe at the same time, ideally speaking, Pakistan wants that it should not get embroiled in this larger rivalry. That's where the real challenge lies, that whether Pakistan can avoid this negative fallout while protecting its own interest. And I would re-emphasize the earlier point that I was making, that a lot will depend that how Pakistan from here on in deals with its economic issues. If Pakistan is able to strengthen its economy, lessen dependence on other countries, then Pakistan is less prone to outside pressure and in a better position, like India. Of course, that India is now a close partner of the US, yet it is importing oil, it is importing weapons and all kinds of stuff from Russia. That shows, because of the economic muscle of India, it can certainly navigate its relationship both with Russia and, of course, with the US. And I think that is the template that Pakistan can follow, provided it addresses its chronic economic problems.
Right. Thank you, Kamran. So some things to learn from the neighbor, from India. And as you correctly pointed out, the strategic partnerships or the foreign policy recalibrations or calculations will depend a lot on whether Pakistan is able to create that economic footing for itself that would allow it to have some sort of strategic autonomy, if not as much as India, but somewhere close. But that might be a long journey, and we'll see how that goes. We have a lot of questions coming in through our attendees as well. But before I go to them, I do want to come to Senator Hussain once again. Slight pivot here, in our work, since we kind of discussed different forces in action and talking about how that might impact the region, I do want to bring your attention to something that we try to do here at ASPI through our South Asia work, is to bring attention to what are the shared challenges, what are the opportunities of cooperation and collective action in this very interconnected sort of world that we live in, especially in a region which unfortunately is the least integrated region in the world. As somebody who has advised on government affairs and foreign affairs in the past and worked tremendously on China, US, and Central Asia as well, I would love to get your thoughts on how do you see some of these opportunities when it comes to working together, South Asia especially as a region, but also with other international players on some of the shared challenges. We also discussed, of course, BRI earlier on, you mentioned it. So regional connectivity is an important way to bring countries together, but there is also a lot of controversy tied to it. There's a lot of issues around transparency. So I would be keen to hear your thoughts on how do you see the future of the Belt and Road Initiative in Asia? And speaking of which, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and its health within Pakistan. Over to you, Senator Hussain.
Well, thank you very much. And I think I'll just be short, journalistic style, talk of the opportunities, the challenges, and then briefly BRI and CPEC. I think Pakistan now has strategic space in this changing Asian geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape. CPEC is the centerpiece of our foreign policy because China is our closest friend and also a neighbor, and it's now taking CPEC forward. And when our Prime Minister and Army Chief were in China last month, President Xi Jinping made it clear to our leadership that China views relations with Pakistan, and I quote, from a strategic long-term perspective. And the joint statement issued by both countries on 7th of June said that Pakistan and China have unshakable mutual trust, which is a critical factor in maintaining the strategic balance in the region. So, you get that sums up. Secondly, we see the Iran-Saudi rapprochement means that the Iran-Saudi proxy war, in which Pakistan was unfortunately one of the backgrounds, that has ceased to exist. So that means we have comfort with relations with Iran and with China and with the new Iranian government. And I was talking to my good friend Javad Zarif, who was the campaign manager for President Masoud Pezeshkian. He's a former foreign minister, and he was saying the top priority of the government is going to be relations, a new Iranian government relations with the region. So that's another opportunity. Then we also see that one lesson of the war in Gaza, and I think it's very important, the Gaza genocide, if I may say so. Ms. Daniels mentioned the war in Ukraine and how the US has taken a position against invasions, but the US has been rather silent on the Israeli occupation and the crimes that have been committed against humanity in Gaza. So on Gaza also, the one lesson is that issues and disputes and conflicts like Palestine, like Kashmir, they cannot be brushed aside. They remain valid, they remain alive. And I think the recent election in India, for Pakistan, it's a very heartening result. We have a diminished Mr. Modi, who is now relying on coalition partners. And it also shows that his policy of demonizing Pakistan, isolating Pakistan, failed miserably because Pakistan just got elected with a whopping majority to the UN Security Council for the next 2 years. And on another opportunity, in my view, is going to be 5th November when President Trump is elected, inshallah, that President Trump has a policy which is, I think, going to be less interventionist. He will end the Ukraine war. He will not expand NATO. He will talk to Kim Jong-un in Korean Peninsula. And also, I think on these issues, he'll be less militaristic. And remember, he also used the K word, Kashmir word, when our Prime Minister was there in July 2019. So I think that there'll be a sharp difference in that. Challenges, 3 challenges are very key. The Asian threat, the annual threat assessment issued by the US intelligence community in March 2024 talked of key threats emanating from 2 relationships, Pakistan-India and India-China. And both are in the South Asia. So they are big challenges. And the other big challenge has already been discussed. Mr. Yusuf also mentioned that the emerging new Cold War. And Pakistan, of course, has been in the eye of the storm in the last 50 years. So we know how to navigate our way. 50 years ago, we were the bridge between China and the United States, and Dr. Kissinger flew from this city of Islamabad on 8th July 71 on the PIA plane secretly, and we brought about the China-America rapprochement. In the late 80s, the last big battle of the Cold War, which led to the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, the demise of the Soviet Union, and the demolition of the Berlin Wall. Pakistan was a key player. So we have been geopolitically in the eye of the storm until recently, in the so-called war on terror after 9/11, we were again in the frontline state. So we know how to navigate our way and how to preserve, protect our key interests, and our key interests lie in the region. And about BRI, I think the BRI is an initiative which has been taken up, I think, with a lot of enthusiasm. Look at the region where we are located. Out of 10 countries, barring Bhutan and India, everybody else is on board, whether it's Myanmar or Maldives or Pakistan or Nepal or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh or Iran or even Afghanistan now. So I think that because they see lucrative Chinese investment, they see opportunities for infrastructure, they see opportunities for employment. So I think these are huge opportunities for them. So a new world is being built up, and I think that we should be on the right side of history. And history shows that the Asian century has to build a better tomorrow, minus any new Cold War, because that would be very debilitating. And Asians have no appetite for any new Cold War or a many militaristic mindset. So I'm very hopeful, and I feel the glass is half full. And I think that with the new administration in the US and new realities on the ground, we can build a better tomorrow based on peace and prosperity and cooperation. And we welcome the US investment also. They have B3W, Build Back Better World, which is now called the Program for Global Investment and Infrastructure. Europeans have also talked of some new initiatives on infrastructure. So we welcome that investment, whether it's from China, from the United States, or from Europe. But I think the key thing is economic development, and we have to focus on building a better life for our people. Thank you.
And thank you, Senator Hussain. And you prophesize the outcome of the elections here in November, but also from your response, I'm going to take that you believe that the glass is half full also for CPEC within the BRI, and Pakistan is positive about CPEC's role as a potential game changer, as it was touted earlier on. There are concerns, of course, from China in terms of security, and I believe Pakistan is implementing and working on that. But there are, again, some going back to what Kamran had mentioned, the economic challenges and the over-reliance on external partners might create problems, at least in terms of how Pakistan is able to recalibrate its foreign policy at all going forward. But I now would like to come very quickly to some of the questions of our attendees here. And Rory, I'm just going to direct this one to you. The question is, how can the United States keep a balanced foreign policy approach for South Asia? And this is for South Asia, but I'm going to broaden it up and say Asia in general, key Asian partners. That includes its bilateral relations with key Asian countries and key South Asian countries, as well as multilateral engagements.
I think the key is to pursue pragmatism, and one element of pursuing pragmatism that I think has been woefully underdeveloped in U.S. foreign policy and has been alluded to by the other speakers on this panel is economic policy in Asia. I mean, really having a coordinated look at the needs of Asian economies and how the U.S. can show up and meet them. That conversation is very much stuck in political limbo in the United States, particularly when it comes to market access of the U.S. economy, right, which is certainly an asset many Asian economies would have. But I think having a balanced foreign policy has to take into account that there's a larger strategic picture to these trade issues, and we need to do a better job of meeting the needs of Asia and its economic needs particularly. And then I think in terms of politics, it's really pursuing a balanced, pragmatic approach. The U.S. is never a unitary voice on foreign policy. There are a lot of different pieces of our government that are pursuing different goals at the same time. Finding some way to reconcile that, to clear partisan division, to have a better understanding of how the U.S. Congress sees its role in protecting democracies around the world versus the U.S. executive branch that really needs to pay attention to the security landscape, to the political landscape, to risks and threats. I think that will be something that could help the U.S. foreign policy come together to better meet the needs of Asian countries. Ultimately, I think the challenge is listening. It's listening and absorbing and being self-reflective. It's not a challenge unique to the United States. It's certainly a challenge for China. It's a challenge for many major complex bureaucracies. But being good listeners, reflecting on the needs of Asian countries, ultimately that will lead to the best balanced foreign policy.
Right. Thank you, Rory. So being good listeners is going to be key for the United States. Kamran, this question, if I could come to you, with it. How does Pakistan see, since we know you've talked a lot about the economy, so you seem the right fit to respond to this. How do you see the Quad and the RCEP, and how might the evolving economic landscape in Asia, particularly with the rise of ASEAN economies, affect Pakistan's economic policies and strategies?
Well, I think I would refer to a statement given by former US ambassador a few years back. He was here in Pakistan, Cameron Munter, when he talked about, you mentioned Quad and other alliances, of course, that is with regard to the Asia Pacific, strategy being pursued by, the US. And Cameron Munter interestingly mentioned that for the US, Pakistan is no longer relevant, and that Asia Pacific strategy just stops at the Wagah border. So that is, of course, a very strange thing, given the fact that, the current, the Pakistan's importance, the geostrategic importance that you see. So, leaving out Pakistan from the greater Asia Pacific strategy certainly can have its own implications. And that's where, in Pakistan, there has been a lot of debate that should Pakistan really remain, pursuing, relationship with the US, or finally decide, joining, the China and the Russian camp to protect its own interests. So, given this, for Pakistan to, remain relevant, and Cameron Munter suggested that for Pakistan to remain relevant, it is important that what Pakistan can offer. And I again would go back to the same, issue that one, that Pakistan needs to address its own, economic issues. Secondly, Pakistan, it is no secret, underperformed to its potential. India is a huge country, but Pakistan is not a small country by any means. As I earlier mentioned, that Pakistan's population is 241 million, 79% are below the age of 40. This means that this can be a gift for Pakistan, and also it's a huge market. The only question is that how Pakistan can remain relevant. And for this, of course, if we see our current relationship in the neighborhood, except China, we have, of course, that with Iran also, we have seen lots of ups and downs in, recent years. Relationship with Afghanistan, we already know that tense. With India, there is a lot of status quo. So I think this is the challenge that Pakistan needs to take on its head on, and if Pakistan really wants to realize its true potential, it has to find a way out that how Pakistan remains relevant, and then US and other players must not ignore Pakistan when they talk about, the Asia Pacific strategy or Quad or other, forums.
Thank you very much, Kamran. I want to be able to come to Senator Hussain now. It's a bit of a buildup of my question to you earlier when we were talking about what are our options of collective action and coordination. This question goes, regional stability in South Asia is contingent on relations or some form of possible mediation between India and Pakistan, given the unifying threat of climate change. I think that's a big factor. And I'll couple that up with energy security, water security, and food security, which Carmen also pointed out earlier too, in terms of if we look at the population, and much of these populations in South Asia are quite young, and the demands are high, and climate change is a massive threat. In what ways is the new government, I believe they mean Pakistan, is exploring transnational environmental issues? How big of it is it a policy priority, so to speak?
Climate change is, of course, a huge challenge for Pakistan. And I, as chairman of the Defense Committee, had already put it in 7-8 years ago that now we have to redefine the notion of national security. The notion of national security, which was very traditional in Pakistan, was only defined in terms of military security or military might. Guns, tanks, F-16 planes, the nuclear bomb. No longer, it's about human security, people's lives and livelihoods. And since I've been active in the climate change movement, and I went to COP26 and 27, 28, my view was that you can see in the last 25 years, we have had 150 freak weather incidents in Pakistan. Flash floods, forest fires, glacial melting, extreme heat, extreme cold. So, and some of the floods which took place in the last 10 years, almost 30% of Pakistan and 20% of the population was underwater. So it's a very serious issue. And this is a borderless issue. You're talking of global warming, which can affect 500 million people out of 1.5 billion people living on the coastal lines. Maldives, for example, they had a meeting of the cabinet underwater because if the temperature goes up, Maldives in 30, 40 years may cease to exist, God forbid. And Nepal, which is landlocked, they had a meeting of the cabinet on the perched high on the Himalayan mountains because the glaciers are melting to draw attention to this big challenge. And I also feel on cybersecurity, for example, we can have this because we try to hack each other all the time. We have got some of the best hackers in the world, India and Pakistan, and we keep playing those games. It's unnecessary. It's debilitating. So we can cooperate on that. The problem actually is that India has been pursuing an ideological foreign policy towards Pakistan under Mr. Modi the last 10 years. And they see it through the prism of Hindutva, which is sort of a bigotry, religious extremism, a divisive approach. But thankfully, this time in the elections, it has backfired. And Pakistan bashing or Muslim bashing no longer gets votes for the ruling party. So I think there will be a revision perhaps and a course correction in India. And let's look at the low-hanging fruit. Climate change is one of them. Cybersecurity is there. I call it the 3 C's: cricket, commerce, and culture. So I think we can have that relationship. And I, for one, also have been advocating for Pakistan's foreign policy that we need a regional reset with our neighbors. Already it was mentioned, Afghanistan and Iran and of course, China, the relationships are rock solid. But still, the issues of security, which we need to be tackled, and Pakistan's issues of internal security and counterterrorism are now inextricably intertwined with regional geopolitics. If we talk of terrorism in one province, it's linked with what's happening in Kabul. If we talk of terrorism in Balochistan, it's linked with what's happening with Iran. And then India has also launched a proxy war, state terrorism. They've also been sending hit squads to kill people in the US and Canada, but they're doing it also in Pakistan, in our region also. So I think a regional reset is called for so that we at least try to move on and get these irritants out of the way and build a better relationship. So I think the opportunity is there, and I think it requires a Nixonian vision and a strong political will to do that. And,
Yes.
And also requires an approach from all the political forces. And in Pakistan, let me be very clear, in the last elections in Pakistan in February, India was a non-issue. It was not even mentioned. But in the elections in India, Pakistan was a big issue. And Pakistan bashing was a major policy plank of the ruling party of Mr. Modi. Unfortunate.
Well, thank you, Senator Sandhi. We, let's manifest a place where we could depoliticize issues like climate change for the benefit of the populations dependent on shared resources, especially for South Asia, but same goes for Southeast Asia, and we see that in other parts of the world, in the Middle East as well. We've got about just a minute and a half to go, or around a minute, but very quickly, if I could get all of your quick reactions to this question, starting with Rory, because this is right in your wheelhouse. How do you see China maintaining its influence in terms of its policy towards Taiwan? And if it changes in any way, what are the options for, well, they ask for Pakistan, but I'm going to broaden it a little bit for Asian neighborhood, including South Asia?
I mean, this is the most sensitive issue in China and in US-China relations. China's policy toward Taiwan doesn't occur in a vacuum. This is a highly complex series of interactions that have been going on for 60 years, 70 years now, starting with the Civil War in China and including the influence, the actions of the United States and its informal commitments to Taiwan through the Taiwan Relations Act. I think fundamentally the US and China do not want to go to war over this issue. A major conflict is possible, but low probability as long as everyone is uncertain who would win that war, how that war would play out. So I think this is an issue that Asia has to very carefully watch and manage. It needs to be aware of the threat, but not to overblow it. Overblowing the threat in this situation can, again, lead to strategic miscalculation. And I urge all Asian countries to educate themselves about that history of Taiwan and to be mindful of the importance of the Taiwan issue to China and to US-China relations.
Thank you, Rory. Senator Sen, very quickly, what are the options South Asia looking at the Taiwan policy coming from China?
I think it's very clear. Taiwan is part of China. China has no intention to go to war. And if you follow the proceedings which concluded on 18th of July, the third plenum of the Communist Party of China under Xi Jinping, the focus is totally on reform, modernization, economic development for the next 10 years. And I think that is the focus. And China has given a blueprint for 2029, 2035, 2049. So I feel that this, I agree with Ms. Daniels, the threat is overblown. There's no possibility of conflict on Taiwan. It's mostly propaganda. And I think we should accept the reality, what was in the Shanghai Communique between Nixon and Zhou Enlai in 1972. Taiwan is an integral part of the People's Republic of China. And there's only one China, and that is the People's Republic of China. So let's not confuse the issue, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sen. Kamran, do you have anything to add in terms of Pakistan's policy options on this issue?
Well, as far as Pakistan is concerned, as you know, that Pakistan is absolutely clear. Pakistan always supports one China policy, and I think that will remain Pakistan's stance. And adding to that, overall, I think Chinese are, I believe, very smart. I think their focus, of course, is to surpass the US as number one economy. And I don't think so that they will go for any misadventure that can distract them from their ultimate goal. So I don't see a threat really emanating from China that they will do something militarily to take over Taiwan.
Thank you, Kamran. We're slightly over time here, but I'm really grateful to all our panelists, Rory, Senator Sen, Kamran, for taking out your time to join us, for sharing your valuable insights. This has been very engaging, very interactive, and also very informative. And thank you to everyone who was in attendance. I hope you found our conversation interesting. Thank you once again to the Express Tribune for this wonderful partnership and the opportunity to do this together. And we hope to continue doing more of these events and talk about more pertinent issues. So please stay in touch with both the Asia Society Policy Institute and the Express Tribune via our social media channels and our website. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.